Zalira was a young girl living in a remote African village, surrounded by ancient forests and vast open lands. The village thrived on tradition, with elders passing down stories from generation to generation. One of the most feared legends was that of the spirit world, a mysterious realm hidden within the depths of the forest, where lost souls wandered endlessly. The elders often spoke of how those who took the wrong path in the forest never returned. Some said they were swallowed by the trees, while others believed they were taken by spirits who guarded the realm. Zalira, like all children in the village, had grown up hearing these warnings. Her mother would often whisper to her at night, "Never stray from the village paths. The forest is alive, and it remembers those who are lost." Despite her mother's warnings, Zalira was filled with curiosity. She had always been drawn to the unknown, fascinated by the stories of those who had dared to explore beyond the village borders. However, fear kept her from acting on her curiosity. The shadows of the trees seemed to stretch too far, the rustling of the leaves always sounding like whispers in the wind. Zalira's cautious nature often set her apart from the other children. While they would run through the edges of the forest, daring one another to step further, she always held back, watching with a mix of fascination and hesitation. Deep inside, she longed to know what lay beyond, but the stories of lost travelers haunted her mind. As she grew older, her fascination with the forbidden path only deepened. She often found herself staring at the entrance to the forest, imagining what mysteries it held. Some villagers claimed that the spirits protected hidden treasures, while others believed they lured people away to test their courage. Zalira did not know which version to believe, but one thing was certain. Once someone took the wrong path, they never came back. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple, Zalira overheard a conversation between the village elders. They spoke of an old legend, one that had not been told to the younger generation. It was said that the doorway to the spirit world only appeared to those who had a purpose, those who were meant to see what lay beyond. A shiver ran down Zalira's spine. For the first time she wondered, was the wrong path truly a mistake, or was it a destiny waiting to be fulfilled? The village was alive with the sounds of drums and chanting as the festival of the ancestors began. Every year, the people gathered under the massive baobab tree at the village center, lighting torches to honor those who had passed. The elders led sacred rituals, calling upon the spirits for guidance, while storytellers wove tales of ancient heroes and lost souls. It was a night of reverence and mystery, a time when the veil between the living and the dead was said to be at its thinnest. Zalira sat near the fire, listening intently as one of the elders spoke of the forbidden paths in the forest. "There are places no mortal should tread," he warned, his voice deep and solemn. "For in the darkest corners of the woods, the spirits walk unseen, and those who venture too far may never find their way back." Despite the warning, Zalira felt a growing excitement. The forest had always intrigued her, and tonight, with the air thick with the scent of burning herbs and the sky illuminated by flickering torches, the call of the unknown was stronger than ever. She glanced at her friends, who exchanged knowing looks. It was their only chance to explore the forest without being watched. As the festival continued, Zalira and her friends slipped away from the crowd, moving swiftly toward the edge of the village. The moment they crossed into the trees, the sounds of the festival faded, replaced by the rhythmic chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the cool night breeze. The forest felt different, alive in a way Zalira had never noticed before. The group moved cautiously, laughing in hushed voices, daring each other to go deeper. At first, they stayed close together, but as curiosity took hold, Zalira wandered a little farther, drawn by something she couldn't quite explain. The deeper she walked, the quieter the forest became. The laughter of her friends faded behind her, and an eerie stillness settled around her. She turned back, expecting to see the glow of the village torches in the distance, but there was only darkness. Panic tightened in her chest. Had she gone too far? Just as she prepared to retrace her steps, something caught her eye, a faint glow ahead, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. A doorway, carved into the trunk of an ancient tree, stood before her. Strange symbols flickered along its edges, and a cold whisper echoed in her ears. "Enter or be lost forever." Zalira's breath hitched. She wanted to run, to find her way back to safety, but something held her in place. The doorway pulsed again, as if calling to her. With her heart pounding, she stepped forward, unaware that she had just crossed into the lost trail, the path no one ever returned from. Zalira's heart pounded as she turned in frantic circles, searching for the way back to her village. The trees that once seemed familiar had shifted, their towering forms now ancient and gnarled, their thick roots twisting like serpents along the forest floor. The path she had walked just moments ago was gone, swallowed by the darkness. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Maybe if she retraced her steps, she could find her way back. But every direction looked the same, shadowy, endless, unfamiliar. The festival's distant drums, which had once been her guide, were silent now. The only sound was the whisper of the wind moving through the leaves, carrying an eerie presence that sent chills down her spine. Her gaze flickered back to the glowing doorway in front of her. It was carved into the trunk of a massive baobab tree, its bark etched with strange markings that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Zalira ran her fingers over the carvings, feeling their warmth beneath her touch. They were not random symbols. She recognized them from the village's ancient tales. These were the markings of the ancestors, the same ones painted onto the elders' skin during sacred ceremonies. The realization sent a new wave of fear through her. If this was truly a door tied to the ancestors, then the stories had been real. The spirit world existed, and she was standing at its entrance. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, rustling the leaves above her. The whispering returned, no longer carried by the breeze but speaking directly into her mind. "Enter or be lost forever." The words coiled around her like vines, heavy with warning and promise. Zalira took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to run. But where? There was no way home, no clear path to follow. The longer she hesitated, the colder the air around her became, the darkness pressing in like unseen hands. Her fingers curled into fists. She had no choice. Steeling herself, she stepped forward and pressed her palm against the doorway. The glow beneath her hand flared, and in an instant, the ground beneath her feet vanished. Zalira gasped as she was pulled into the light. Her body felt weightless, as if she were falling through water, yet there was no sensation of air rushing past her. Colors swirled around her, deep purples, blues, and golds, shifting and morphing like living things. The whispers grew louder, overlapping into an indecipherable hum. Shadows flickered at the edges of her vision, figures moving just beyond her grasp. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fall ended. Zalira's feet touched solid ground. The glow around her faded, and the world came into focus. She was no longer in the forest. She had entered the spirit world. Zalira steadied herself, her breath coming in quick, uneven gasps as she took in her surroundings. The world around her was unlike anything she had ever seen. The sky stretched endlessly above, painted in shades of deep violet and indigo, as if frozen in a state of eternal twilight. There was no sun, no moon, just a soft, eerie glow that seemed to come from the very air itself. Small floating orbs drifted lazily through the space around her, pulsating like living fireflies. The ground beneath her feet was smooth and dark, neither stone nor earth, but something in between. Strange, whispering voices echoed from unseen places, murmuring words she couldn't understand. Zalira shivered. This was not her world. A rustling sound made her spin around, her muscles tensing. From the shadows of the twisted trees, a figure emerged, a sleek, powerful leopard with golden fur speckled with black. But this was no ordinary creature. Its eyes glowed a piercing silver, and when it spoke, its voice was deep and knowing. "You have crossed into the spirit world, child." Zalira stumbled back, her heart racing. You can talk?" The leopard sat gracefully, its tail curling around its paws. "I am Ekun, guardian of the realm of echoes, and you," he said, tilting his head, "are not meant to be here." Zalira swallowed hard, her hands shaking. "I didn't mean to come here. I was lost. The doorway—" "The doorway is not found by accident," Ekun interrupted, his silver eyes narrowing. "Only those with purpose may enter, and now that you have, there is only one way to leave." Zalira's stomach twisted. "How?" Ekun rose, his muscles rippling beneath his golden fur. "You must face 3 trials. Only by completing them will the spirits allow you to return to your world." His voice grew heavy, laced with warning. "But be warned, if you fail, you will remain here, forever." Zalira's breath caught in her throat. The thought of being trapped in this strange place, surrounded by whispers and shadows, sent a chill through her. She glanced around, searching for any sign of escape, but the landscape stretched on endlessly, a vast world of shifting light and deep unknowns. "What are the trials?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ekun's gaze held hers. "You will see soon enough." He turned and padded forward, motioning with his head for her to follow. Zalira hesitated only a moment before stepping after him, her heart pounding. She didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. If she wanted to return home, she would have to survive whatever the spirit world had in store for her. Ekun led Zalira through the eerie twilight of the spirit world, his golden fur glowing faintly under the violet sky. They walked in silence, the only sound the soft crunch of her footsteps on the strange, smooth ground. Zalira's heart pounded with anxiety. What kind of trials awaited her? Would she even be able to pass them? Soon, they reached a wide river that shimmered unnaturally, its surface smooth and glass-like. But as Zalira stepped closer, she realized something was wrong. The water did not reflect the sky or the trees around it. Instead, it reflected moments from her own life. She gasped. The river showed her as a child, sitting alone after the other village children had mocked her for being too afraid to venture into the deeper forest. She saw herself falling during her first hunting lesson, unable to lift the bow as the elders shook their heads in disappointment. Memory after memory unfolded. Every failure, every fear, every moment she had tried to bury deep inside her heart. Zalira clenched her fists, her breath quickening. "What is this?" Ekun's voice was calm but firm. "The river of reflection. It shows you what you refuse to face." As she stared at the images, an unsettling feeling washed over her. It was as if the river itself was watching her, waiting. Then, without warning, the surface of the water shifted. A shadowy hand formed beneath the rippling memories and shot out toward her. Zalira screamed as the water came alive, pulling at her ankles with an icy grip. Before she could react, she was yanked forward, plunging into the depths. The cold wrapped around her like an unforgiving embrace, and the water filled her ears with voices, her own voice, whispering her worst doubts and fears. "You are weak. You were never meant to be brave. No one believes in you." She thrashed, trying to break free, but the more she fought, the deeper she sank. The river did not try to drown her with water. It drowned her in regret. Every failure she had ever experienced weighed her down, dragging her toward the endless abyss below. She was losing herself. Then, through the overwhelming whispers, she heard a different voice, her own, but steady and strong. "You are still standing. You are still fighting. You have always risen, no matter how many times you fell." Zalira's eyes snapped open. The river had only shown her half the truth. Yes, she had failed, but she had also survived. Yes, she had feared, but she had also learned. She stopped struggling. Instead of fighting against the current, she embraced it. She accepted the mistakes, the pain, the fear. But she would not let them define her. At that moment, the water shifted, the hands loosened, the whispers faded. And then, as suddenly as she had been pulled in, Zalira broke through the surface, gasping for air. She was back on the riverbank, drenched but alive. Ekun nodded approvingly. You have passed the first trial. Zalira looked back at the river, its surface now calm. She had faced her past, and it had no power over her anymore. She stood, ready for the next challenge. Zalira followed Ekun deeper into the spirit world, her clothes still damp from the river of reflection. Though she had passed the first trial, her heart remained heavy. If each challenge tested something deep within her, what would come next? The landscape shifted as they walked, the glowing orbs floating farther apart, and soon they arrived at the mouth of a massive cave. It loomed before her, jagged and unwelcoming, its entrance shrouded in thick shadows. A cold wind drifted from within, carrying faint whispers that sent chills down her spine. This is the cave of echoing lies, Ekun said, his silver eyes fixed on her. Inside, the spirits will try to deceive you. They will twist the truth and make you doubt yourself. To pass this trial, you must find what is real. Zalira swallowed hard, then took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment she crossed the threshold, darkness swallowed her whole. The cave was vast, yet no walls could be seen. The air was thick with voices, soft, eerie, and relentless. They slithered around her like unseen serpents, whispering riddles and half-truths. You were never meant to be strong. They only pretended to love you. You are lost, and no one will come for you. Turn back. There is no way forward. The words came from everywhere, bouncing off the unseen walls, growing louder and louder. Zalira clenched her fists. It was like being trapped in a storm of voices, each one trying to pull her in a different direction. Her pulse quickened. What if they were right? What if she had been fooling herself all along? Then a memory surfaced. Her grandmother's voice, warm and steady. The truth is in your heart, Zalira. When the world tries to confuse you, close your eyes and listen to what is real. Zalira exhaled shakily. She had trusted the river, and now she had to trust herself. She shut her eyes, blocking out the swirling shadows and the endless voices. She focused on her heartbeat, steady and strong. And then she listened. At first, the whispers only grew louder, desperate to keep her trapped. But then, beneath the noise, she heard something different, a voice, faint but clear. It wasn't shouting or tricking her. It wasn't trying to frighten her. It was simply there. You are Zalira. Her eyes snapped open. The voices screeched as if burned by the truth. The cave trembled, and the shadows recoiled, fading into nothingness. A path appeared before her, bathed in soft light. She had found her way. Ekun stood waiting at the cave's exit, his gaze full of approval. You have passed the second trial. Zalira stepped forward, her heart lighter than before. She was beginning to understand. These trials weren't meant to break her. They were meant to reveal who she truly was. One more challenge remained. Zalira followed Ekun through the spirit world, her body exhausted, but her mind sharper than ever. She had faced her past in the river of reflection and overcome deception in the cave of echoing lies. Now, only one trial remained. They stopped before a towering stone archway, its surface carved with ancient symbols that pulsed with golden light. This was the final threshold, the doorway back to her world. But blocking her path was something far more terrifying than any whispering spirit. A massive figure loomed before the doorway. It was twice the height of any man, with thick, shadowed limbs and curling horns that gleamed like obsidian. Its glowing red eyes burned into Zalira as it stepped forward, its deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "I am Bayako, guardian of the doorway," the spirit announced. "Only those with the heart of a warrior may leave this realm." Zalira's breath caught in her throat. She was no warrior. She had never fought a battle in her life. Bako raised a clawed hand, and the air around her shimmered. Suddenly, Zalira was no longer standing before the doorway. The spirit world faded, replaced by visions so real they made her stomach twist. She saw herself back in her village, but no one noticed her. She called out to her family, to her friends, but they walked past her as if she did not exist. She was alone, forgotten. Then, the vision shifted. She was back at the river of reflection, but this time she drowned, unable to escape the pull of her regrets. Another shift. The cave of echoing lies returned, but instead of fading, the whispers grew louder, clawing at her mind until she could no longer tell who she was. Fear tightened around her like chains. This was different from the other trials. The river had tried to show her her past. The cave had tested her ability to find truth. But Bako was doing something far worse. He was showing her her deepest fears, forcing her to relive them as if they were real. She wanted to scream, to run, to give up. But then she remembered something. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It wasn't about never being afraid. True courage was moving forward despite fear. Zalira clenched her fists and took a deep, steadying breath. "This isn't real," she said, her voice firm. The illusions flickered. "You can show me my fears," she said, taking a step forward, "but they don't control me." Bako's eyes narrowed. The visions swirled around her, trying to consume her one last time. But Zalira didn't falter. She lifted her chin, standing her ground. The shadows wavered. Then, with a final gust of wind, they vanished. Bako watched her in silence before finally stepping aside. "You have faced fear and walked forward anyway," he said. "You are worthy." The doorway behind him glowed brighter, and Zalira knew she had passed the final trial. Zalira stood before the towering figure of Bako, her heart still pounding from the trial she had just overcome. The great horned spirit, once an immovable guardian, now studied her with a gaze that held something she had not expected: respect. "You have proven your courage," Bako rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "But you are no ordinary traveler. The spirits have watched you, and they have chosen to bestow upon you a gift." He lifted his massive hand, and in his palm lay a pendant, glowing softly with golden light. The chain was woven from delicate silver strands, and at its center was a small stone, swirling with an energy that seemed alive. Zalira hesitated before reaching out. "What is it?" Bako placed the pendant in her hands, and at once warmth spread through her fingers. A whisper, faint yet familiar, echoed in her mind. "We are with you, child of the earth. This is our gift." Bako watched her closely. "Inside this pendant dwells an ancestral spirit. It will guide you in times of great need, though its power is not to be taken lightly." Zalira closed her fingers around the pendant, feeling the weight of something far greater than herself. Ekun, the talking leopard who had guided her through this journey, stepped forward and bowed his head. "You are different now, Zalira. The spirit world does not grant such gifts without reason. You have a path to walk, one that extends beyond this place." Before Zalira could ask what he meant, the ground beneath them trembled. A deep rumbling filled the air, and the violet sky above began to crack like shattered glass. The glowing orbs flickered, and the entire spirit world seemed to be unraveling. "Your time here is ending," Bako said. "Return before the doorway closes forever." Zalira clutched the pendant to her chest and turned toward the archway, its golden light now pulsing wildly. Without looking back, she sprinted toward it, her feet barely touching the ground as the world behind her crumbled into dust. The light engulfed her, She fell. And then Zalira gasped as her eyes flew open. She was lying on the forest floor, her fingers digging into the cool earth beneath her. The towering trees swayed gently above, and the whispering wind carried the familiar sounds of her village in the distance. She had returned, but something was different. She sat up slowly, her heart still racing. Around her neck, the pendant still glowed softly, proof that it had all been real. She had entered the spirit world. She had faced her fears, passed the trials, and been chosen for something greater. Zalira didn't know what awaited her next, but one thing was certain. She was no longer the same girl who had once feared the dark forest. She was something more. Zalira sat up slowly, her body aching as if she had travelled for days. The cool breeze of the familiar forest wrapped around her, and the distant hum of her village carried through the trees. For a long moment, she simply breathed, her mind struggling to grasp what had just happened. Had it been real? She glanced down at her hands, and there, resting in her palm, was the pendant, warm, glowing faintly, humming with the presence of the spirit inside. It had been real. Staggering to her feet, she clutched the pendant to her chest and began walking. The journey back to the village felt surreal, her senses hyper-aware of every rustling leaf, every shift in the wind. When she finally stepped out of the trees, the familiar huts of her home came into view, and the voices of her people reached her ears. A group of villagers gathered around a fire, exchanging stories after the night's festival. When they noticed her, gasps of shock and relief spread through the crowd. "Zalira!" her mother cried, rushing forward to embrace her. "Where have you been?" "We searched for you," her father added, his eyes filled with both worry and anger. "You were gone for a whole night." "I dot." Zalira hesitated. How could she explain what had happened? That she had stepped through a glowing doorway into another world? That she had faced trials, spoken to spirits, and been gifted a pendant carrying the wisdom of ancestors? "I got lost," she finally said, her voice quiet but steady. The village elder, a man with deep wrinkles and sharp eyes, stepped forward, his staff tapping against the earth. "Lost? And yet you return unharmed, carrying something that was not yours before." His gaze settled on the pendant. "Tell me, child, what have you seen?" Taking a deep breath, Zalira told them everything. The river of reflection, the cave of echoing lies, Bako the guardian, and Ekun, the leopard who had guided her. She spoke of the trials, the voices, the illusions that had tried to break her, and the moment she had overcome them. Silence followed. Then, laughter erupted from one of the younger men. "A spirit world, talking leopards, this is just a story." "Yes," another villager agreed. "A tale for children. You must have dreamed it." Others nodded, murmuring amongst themselves. Even her father sighed and shook his head. But not everyone dismissed her words. Zalira turned to her grandmother, the oldest and wisest woman in the village. Unlike the others, she did not laugh. She simply looked at Zalira with knowing eyes, a small smile forming on her lips. "The spirits choose who they will," she said softly, nodding. "And they have chosen you." That night, as Zalira lay in her bed, the pendant warm against her skin, she drifted into sleep. And in her dreams, Ekun and Bako stood before her, their forms wreathed in golden light. "One day, you will need us again." The adventure was far from over. The prophecy-fulfilled years had passed since Zalira's journey to the spirit world. The girl who once feared the dark forest had grown into a strong and wise young woman. Though many still doubted her tale, she never forgot what she had seen. The pendant remained close to her heart, a constant reminder of the spirit's gift. Then, the disaster came. The village had thrived for many seasons, but now, the land withered under an unrelenting sun. The riverbeds cracked, the crops failed, and hunger spread like a sickness. The elders gathered daily, their faces drawn with worry, yet no solution came. One evening, Zalira stood at the edge of the barren fields, clutching the pendant. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Ekun, Barko, if you can hear me, I need your guidance." For days, nothing happened. But then, on the seventh night, as she slept, the dream came. Zalira stood in a vast desert, the wind whipping sand around her. In the distance, a familiar figure emerged from the swirling dust. Ekun, the talking leopard. His golden eyes gleamed in the darkness. "The spirits have waited for you," he said. "The village stands at the edge of ruin, but the answer lies where it all began, the doorway to the spirit world." She awoke with a gasp. Without hesitation, she gathered what little strength she had and made her way toward the forbidden path in the forest. Though the trees had not changed, she saw them differently now, not as something to fear, but as silent watchers of an ancient secret. At the clearing where she had once entered the spirit world, the air shimmered. The pendant grew warm against her chest. And then, the doorway appeared. Barko stood waiting, his massive form unchanged by time. His deep voice rumbled through the air. "You have returned, child of the earth. What do you seek?" "The spirits once tested me," Zalira said, stepping forward. "Now, my people need their help. The land is dying, and I must save them." Barko studied her, then nodded. "The spirits never abandoned you, Zalira. The strength you seek is already within you. You have been chosen, not just to walk between worlds, but to protect them both." At his command, the sky above them split open, and rain began to fall, not just in the spirit world, but in her own. Zalira ran back to the village as the first drops touched the earth. The villagers rushed from their huts, their disbelief turning to joy as the dry land drank deeply. The riverbeds swelled once more, the fields came alive, and hope was restored. The elders finally saw the truth. They had doubted her, but now they could no longer deny what she had become. Zalira was no longer just the girl who had strayed into the forest. She was the village's protector, the bridge between the living and the spirits. And as she stood at the edge of the forest, watching the shadows shift, she knew this was only the beginning. What new dangers lay ahead for Zalira and her people? The spirits always had more stories to tell.